department community and equity officer January 1st this year. And he's just brought so much energy and experience and thoughtfulness to the discussions within the department and providing me such great guidance, even in a reasonably short amount of time and during COVID. So we've been just really thrilled to have him here. And so it's really great that he is the inaugural speaker for this semester's colloquium. Bryan was born and raised in Queens, New York, and is a first-generation college student. And he earned his bachelor's degree in sociology from Norfolk State University and a master's of public administration from the University of Delaware. He also served as an active duty US Army officer. And so in terms of his experience in this area of DEI, he's served in many capacities at various universities. In fact, Bryan was at MIT for some time, and he's really transformed admissions during that time. And unfortunately, we lost him for some time when he moved on to work at Cornell University, Hopkins University, the Ohio State University. But we're just really happy to have him back. Particularly having him in MechE is a huge win for us. So I won't kind of go through all the various experiences he has. He certainly has just really abundance of insights and experiences from all of his different past places that he's been. And we really look forward to continuing to work together very closely. So with that, I'll pass this over to Bryan and have him talk about what he plans to share, which is with a very provocative title: "Everybody wants to go to heaven, but no one wants to die. Unorthodox approaches to achieve equity and diversity in higher education."
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well. Excuse me for a second while I just try to minimize these photos because I don't really want to look at myself. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is the title. I think is really a great title. And I think it encapsulates a lot of things. I think what it says is that we really all want diversity, but are we willing to do the things that it takes to get there? I've been joking and saying that there are about 250 slides in this slide deck, which is really not true. It's only about 15, but they are a little dense. So what I'm going to do is kind of go through them quickly to make sure that there's time at the end for everybody to answer their questions and to talk about things. So with that said, we'll get started. All right. All right, so here's a quick overview. So we're going to talk about diversity begins at home, a quick bio, talk about what I've done, talk about my successes, my failures, what will be different, what have I learned, how to build a better community and culture, and then finally, what I call Jackisms. So the first one, let's talk about this great town of Milledgeville, Georgia. It was population about 8835 in 1940s when my mom was born. There you can see it right in the middle of the state, not far from Atlanta. And it had the distinction of being the capital of Georgia and the Confederacy during the Civil War. So fun place. And here are some of the famous folks that have come out of there. Of course, the writer, Flannery O'Connor, the blues artist, Fish Scales from one of my favorite groups, Snappy Roots, Oliver of Laurel and Hardy, and Alfred Jack Sanford, who was my grandfather, who we'll talk more about and the influence that he had. And on North Wayne Street, what I really want to share, which is most important, this is the one-room schoolhouse that my mom went to from grades 0 or K, then through about the 10th grade. And it is still there. It was because she was not allowed to go to the regular public school. And her and her 5 brothers and a bunch of other kids from the city of Milledgeville, or the town, were relegated to here. And within 2 generations, we've gone from my mom, who's completed high school, to me with a master's degree, and my oldest daughter with a bachelor's. So education and the world in which it lives really can make a change. So quick bio about me. So I've been doing admissions work in higher ed for about the last 20 years. As Evelyn mentioned, at Cornell, this is my second time back at MIT, Hopkins, the Ohio State, OHIO. And of course, I spent time as an Army officer, and of which I'm obliged to say, go Army, beat Navy. So what have I done? I've really specialized in URM talent. So identifying, recruiting, admitting, yielding, and then ultimately retaining, supporting, and graduating that talent. And in many ways, if you think about it, that's a great way to think about what we want to do in our community. We want to identify great folks of color, recruit them, have them join us, keep them, and then see them successful, whether undergrad, a graduate, a faculty member through tenure, a staff person through any of the things that they want to do. And I'm using the term URM, and let me define that real quickly. It's underrepresented minorities, which is defined as African Americans, Native American, Latino students, all of whom are US citizens. So this does not include any of the folks who could otherwise fall in these categories if they're not US citizens. In my time, I've read about 40,000 college essays, read about 20,000 college applications, helped to admit around 12,000 students. And here's my own personal moniker: making educational communities more diverse and inclusive, one person at a time. So let's talk about the numbers, the successes. Always put those up front. Cornell, super lucky / successful, like hit the right place. Our URM applications were up over the time I was there, 70%. Our admits were up 81%. It's an early decision school. These are all undergraduate numbers. We had virtually no URMs in our early pool. So that was up 125%. And we were able to enroll almost a third of our classes, URMs. And we also created some foundational CBO relationships, and that's community-based organizations. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then the success continued here. URM applications were up 32%. We were able to enroll 46, the enrollment went up 46%. What's so interesting is the year that I got here, and the class of 2005 had been admitted, and it was all 55 African Americans, inclusive of that was 13 African American women. We were able to more than double those numbers in terms of overall, and almost triple the number of women we brought. And the yield in 2007 was the best of highly selectives. Yes, we beat Harvard that year. And in 2008, we missed beating Harvard by 0.2 of a percentage point. I know, I can't help it. I'm competitive. So let's talk a little bit about the process. So we did outreach. There's this thing called community-based organizations. They are places that formed out of a need. There are community places that brought together great students of color. And instead of having to go to a bunch of high schools, we said, hey, let's go to these CBOs. We were the first ones to go to one of the biggest ones in New York City, Prep for Prep, that had these amazing students. And so we were able to really parlay that. Over a 10-year period, we were able to identify over 1,000 CBOs to recruit from regularly. Also, we were able to tap into professional organizations. I love this acronym, ABAFOILS, the Association of Black Admissions Financial Aid Offices of the Ivy League and Sister Schools. Say that 3 times fast. And of course, NACAC, the National Association of College Admissions and Counselors. These are great places to find Where are these students? Where are these gems? Where are these great kids? Where are these ones that everyone's saying is not in the pipeline? And how do we get them there? Uh, we were able to really change the question. What is a college a reward for? Yes, I entered that in a preposition. Uh, but the question is this, is college a reward for past performance or future potential? And I would stake my claim that it's future potential. And when you look at it that way and turn the question on its head, then the application process doesn't make as much sense as currently configured. We took a look at cognitive processes versus non-cognitive. And the cognitive process is very simple. It hasn't changed in almost 100, well, more than 100 years. Grades, what grades mean, fit and match as seen through the essay, uh, standardized tests, letters of recommendation, extracurriculars, where appropriate interviews, and talent-based submissions. Uh, Students interested in art or architecture, interested in things in performance art, um, theater, music, all of those things. And also juxtapositioning that with non-cognitive. And I'll show you what the non-cognitive is. And it's really a great way to look at what we call those soft skills. But we know those things that are great indicators, even though they are not necessarily quantifiable, uh, they have qualifying characters that really help us to understand. And then the learning delta. This is something that I kind of came up with. And it's the idea of if we could measure a student's growth in a class, not just the output, would it give us a better insight to what kind of students, not necessarily they are, but they could be? For example, a student walks in a class with an A and walks out with an A. Did they walk in with that knowledge already there? Did they grow some? Is that A the ceiling or that A the floor? A student walks in with a C minus average and moves it up to B plus. Very measurable. And we know the only way to get there is that they use some of those non-cognitive factors. So we talked about cognitive, procedurally based, consistent from beginning to end. This comes down to synthesis of a decision. And as much as people want to tell me that it's not, it's still highly subjective. So now with this non-cognitive piece, we're gonna kind of level a field and focus on assessing abilities and admissibility other than standardized tests and just grades. Because a student at a high school with 23 APs is not gonna have the same opportunities as a student from a school with 2. So here's some of the things that we can use. And I call this the love factor. When any of us are pressed to explain what the word love means, we will all fumble, but we all know we all know intrinsically what it means. We also know that just because we can't put words to it doesn't mean it isn't real. These are some great examples for putting words to non-cognitive things, things that are qualifiable and give them a real quant feel. And these are all of the things I think you would agree that you need to be successful in college, alongside with great grades and great tests. This is what will make you successful at a place like MIT. And I'm not going to linger on these too long. I promise to make this presentation available to anybody that wants to see it. How I failed. Now, this is the really interesting part. I concentrated on the lowercase d in diversity, numbers. How many students could I get here? How many students of color can I get here? Because it's a numbers game and that's how we measure success. But is that really the only way to measure how successful we are? I planned for failure and not for success. Well, what does that mean? That means anybody that's had a baby or a puppy or older parents, the first thing you do before you bring your child home or your puppy is you crawl around on the floor and you see what they can get into and you try to remove the danger from them. You are planning for not when they screw up, not if they screw up, but when they screw up. planning for failure. I did not plan for success. I did not know uh, within a matter of 1 year we were going to turn the numbers over so quickly. So what does that mean? That means that downstream, we're bringing a much larger group of students of color, much larger group of students from lower socioeconomic status, a lot of students with a lot of needs without changing the way advising moved, without changing the way student culture moved, without changing um, or coming up with ways to make sure that when we brought them here, we could support them. I didn't think about any of that. We didn't have any more faculty. And I think a faculty of color or faculty that were really looking for these students. And in fact, one of the blowback things about this is these are the students who learned, if we look back at all of those things that they needed to do, ask for help, engage. These students, in fact, may actually seem more needy than other traditional students, which could then lead to the wrong assumption that because they're asking for more, they need more because they're lesser. So these were not the things that we talked about or thought about. What I also did not realize is that, this is like filling a balloon and pushing on one side of it. Well, all the air goes to the other end. So just because we built in more students of color in the undergraduate level did not mean that there were going to be more more faculty, more staff. The whole community was not involved. I underestimated the threshold of pain. This is another one of my sayings. I'm just going to boil it down. It's the point at which an institution cannot and will not go any further with diversity. They've hit their level. And so one of the reasons why I left MIT the first time is that I thought we hit the threshold of pain. I thought we were at the point where we were saying, okay, too much, too soon, let's slow down. And I didn't feel like we had, nor did I want to. Youthful exuberance, or hubris, I should say. But you've got to understand where that threshold is, draw the line, move up to it, and then push the institution out further so that that threshold is deeper. I underestimated the institutional racism. Uh, and I say that in the biggest sense, in that from the founding of this country, it's our original sin, as I've heard it said. So any institution that's come along after that has benefited from it. Micro messages were a big thing. Um, I saw African American students who would come up to me during CPW, the hosting weekend, and say, okay, tell me how I really got in here. And I'm like, psh. At any time of those 12 passes, one person could have said no and you wouldn't be here. Students being told, well, you got in because you're Black, or don't go there, you're taking my spot. Didn't know we were holding spots for anybody. Oh, it must be affirmative action. All of those things really seep in to the process and to the students. Lack of language for positive change. The only good thing that has really come out after George Floyd is the free use of language that helps us to identify what's going on racially and ethnically. In 2005, we weren't talking about white privilege. We weren't talking about fragility. We were barely talking about micro-messaging. We weren't really talking about imposter syndrome. We weren't talking about speaking truth to power. We weren't talking about any of those things that I now have in my lexicon. In fact, for mentioning some of those things, you were many times dismissed or just said, no, it's better. And at that point, we were just on the cusp of our first African-American president. So then we were in a post-racial environment. Fear of the unknown, that drives a lot. We are in a very conservative organization. Change is glacial in higher ed. And so anything that, it comes down to two things. It's known or it's not known. And sometimes the devil we know, we're more happy with than in fact, the unknown. And I didn't realize how much that would affect people. And then ego and self-care. Uh, I intertwined who I was with what I did. And so all successes and failures were celebrated, or defeats were felt. And there was no separation from what I did and who I was. And at the end of 3 years, I was pretty much toast. Excuse me for a second. I'm just going to close my window, close my shade because it's getting quite bright. Okay, thank you. And so now we talk about things like self-care. We know about the fatigue of being a person of color. We know about what it takes and how we have inculcated everything that's being said, but we also are learning how to separate it out. And I think I've learned to become far more humble and to play the long game. So the first time I was here, I chose transformational over transactional. I had a big personality, I had lots of connections. For the first time, I was in a place where resources were not a factor, cachet was high, and I was going to ride that horse to the fair. And I did, and it was great, but that's not sustainable. The insidious thing about any ism is that it makes its way into every crack and crevice. And so to defeat it, you must become transactional to the point that you're pushing diversity down into every nook and cranny as well, so that over time, the biggest success one can have here is that in 50 years, something you did grew legs, grew strength, or is still here. Next one is to focus on the uppercase, inclusion, community, and of course, culture. And I describe these all the time as quite simply, inclusion is just that. Community is the ship in which we all travel. Culture is the life support. So without both, we will end up with a ship with 1 million people on it. But if they all show up deceased, then what good is it? It doesn't really help us. Blowback. Let's talk about blowback. Blowback is a term, I believe, coined by the CIA, which really says it's the unintended consequences of perceived good thing. Overthrowing the Shah, overthrowing an elected government in 1952 in Iran eventually led to where we are now. Thought it was a good thing, not so much. Blowback, you bring that many people here to challenge a pretty homogeneous environment, you're going to get blowback from all kinds of places in ways you didn't know. So you got to expect it, and it's got to be par for the course. I have to learn as much as I share. I come here hoping to really revolutionize the way we look at community and how we deal with culture and inclusion, but I must also be willing to learn. I must be willing to understand the community and the culture that I'm coming to, and understand while what I suggest could work, it just might not work here. Creating sustainable policy, that goes right back to transactional. What is real? What can we do? How do we put our money where our mouth is? How do we put our efforts there? How do we do those things that are sustainable and real? I would say the first thing probably the wisest, best decision that this department has come up with was creating this position. I'm not going to say that's true of hiring me. I'll leave that out to you guys to figure out. But definitely, that is a sustainable policy. We cannot rely on having great department heads like Evelyn, because while she's championing it, she moves on to become a provost somewhere else. Without sustainable policy, everything could fall apart. And so we have to seek to create, and the devil's in the details, get in there and create that policy. We want to transform the culture to meet the needs of the community. chicken or egg, right? I think the community comes first, but the community will police itself and determine what's important to it. I am here to help make sure that we keep out those isms as much and that inclusion is everything. And by those isms, you name it, racism, classism, anything that ends in ism that isn't, that's discriminatory. And of course, we have to build allies, not just within mechanical engineering, but within the Institute, within the greater educational community across the city as much. One of the things that we suffer from are things we have no control over. We could be the best place in the world, but if students have decided that they're not coming here because Boston's the most racist city in the world, then we're all upended. So we've got to build allies everywhere we can. So what will be different? The Army has a great saying. This is one that stuck with me. Mission first, people always. And that really means that the mission is for mechanical engineering to be the finest research or mechanical engineering department in the world, or to maintain that. But we cannot do that at the expense of people. And so there's a nexus there that we need to make sure, yes, that is our mission, but how do we accomplish it by making people better? I believe the term is in economics, Pareto optimality, which is a win-win. And that's what we want. Intersectionality. Intersectionality is a relatively new term. And what I love about it is that it gets us away from the either or. The Black people issue, the Latino people issue, the women issue, the Asian American issue. No, what it says is they all can meet, that we need to look at what it means to suffer or what it means to be in community and all of these things, because no person, I am not just a Black man. Most folks are not just one thing. You could be a person of color on the LGBT spectrum who has a visible or invisible disability, who is married to someone or partnered with someone from another ethnicity. And so your worlds are crashing all over the place. So we're not going to try to solve one problem. We're going to try to create a community that is accepting of everyone so that you can find your place. And we talk a lot about equality. And, you know, one of my best friends is an airline pilot. And you know, he talks about equality and equity. There are not enough folks of color flying planes. If we talked about equity, we would just simply say, all right, you know what? We want more people to fly planes. Let's just get some people in here to fly planes. But without the training or the understanding, it's not going to work well. And those folks that were there have inherent power. So what we've got to do is equity. And so equity is tricky because many people feel that to get equity, it's a zero-sum game. If you were empowered, you must lose something, but that's not true. And so we must focus as much on equity as equality. The signature, my personal signature on my email is really looks at that. It says, and all instead of men, I put presumed persons are created instead of equal, equitable. Imagine if that's what the Constitution said, where we would be now. This is important, one of the biggest things, and I tell Evelyn this all the time. In terms of diversity, I am agnostic, and I must remain so, because my goal here is to provide the best advice for this community, and to make sure that we are putting together the best community we can. That is not accomplished by me prophesizing, by me trying to convert the non-converted or the converted. So I am really here to be a conduit, so to speak, and to make sure that I'm putting out the best information for the department. Is it important that I believe in what I'm saying? Absolutely. Are there core tenets of it that is me? Yes. And again, that's that separation of ego. But I think it's important because if I remain agnostic, then what I will find and what you will find is that you can respect and trust me. And then this is my favorite saying at the bottom, I don't know. And I've learned that works really well, especially with you technical folk, because if I pretend to know what I don't know, you're going to eat me alive. So let's just cut to the chase, and I'll tell you before you tell me I don't know. Oh, that's interesting. Let's see what we can do. All right, so we want to build a better world. How are we going to do it? This is my three-prong approach. Everybody says, trust me. We should begin with trust. And I don't believe in trust, not one bit, because before you start with trust, you must start with respect. I respect one of my really close friends. I am left of center. He is far right of center. And we have some ground rules that allow us to talk about politics. And I respect what he is saying. I respect who he is. And because I respect him, I can trust him. But you cannot go straight to trust. Just think about this. Do you ever trust anybody in the whole wide world outside of your immediate circle and your family that says, trust me? No. You've got to build respect. And once you build respect, you can build trust. Once you build respect and trust, you can collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. So this takes some time. The problem is the biggest piece to respect almost seems silent, almost seems like you're doing nothing. It takes the longest amount of time. And then building that trust, a little less time. By the time you get to the collaborate piece, if 1 and 2 are there, you will be able to move more fluidly. But don't just think it's about one big building respect, one big building trust. That process has to begin over and over and over again. Because remember, we talked about intersectionality. So where you might have respect in one area, you may need to build it in another area. And so this is kind of Hegelian. So thesis and okay, don't get me started on the philosophy stuff, but it's the same thing. So even when you get to collaborate, 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 you may have to start again from square one. So I'm going to, hopefully that gave you a good sense of who I am. What I started to do was to tell you all the things I'm going to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you'll see that. But I think it's important for you to understand fundamentally who I am. I am a first generation student of college who did not know he was first generation until probably 7 or 8 years out of college. My grandparents on my mother's side had 13 grandkids, and all 13 went to college. And so for me, it was not a if, but a when. My grandfather, Alfred Jack Sanford, his nickname Jack was because he was a master of all things. So Jack of all trades, was the only African American in a town literally divided by a railroad track who built houses in the Black side of town. So if that house was built there, he had something to do with it. He either created the bricks, helped make the mortar. He was an amazing man. Died at 89, did not know how to read or write, but could build a building. Amazing. He had, up to now, his grandkids count 91 different sayings. And so I'm going to share with you about 18 of them. Some are inappropriate, not the ones I'm sharing, but from time to time, you will often hear me say, as my grandfather would say, and this is true, so let's just kind of go through them. Simple don't mean easy. Simply, we want a diverse school. Okay, that's simple. That doesn't mean easy. E equals MC squared does not mean I can go out and build a nuclear device. It's simple, but not necessarily easy. This is true. This is true of the folks in our college, I'm sorry, at the Institute and in the world. They've not been at the table. And guess what? They've been on the menu. I think this one is particularly true. Don't swim the shallow end of the think tank. He used to always say, people would always say, I need to get my stuff together. And he'd always say, remember, if you get your stuff together, all you got is a pile of stuff. Make sure the light at the end of the tunnel isn't an oncoming train. Self-explanatory. Only dead fish go with the flow. So we're going to swim upstream a lot on this, and I'm looking forward to it. To break old patterns, you must learn to unlearn. That is what we're going to do. That is how we're going to make this all transactional. That is how we are going to yank the institutionalized racism right out by learning to unlearn. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just got to be. And we're going to seek progress, and we're going to keep moving. This is a great one. Never play blood sport with a vampire. And by that, know who you're picking fights with, and know when and where to do it. And this is something I think is important for allies, for all of us that are allies. Don't confuse doing good things with doing the right thing. We often do something and go, oh, I feel really good about myself. But that was about yourself and not necessarily about the people you're supposed to help. Just a few more here. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I think I'm in the right room. I am nowhere near the smartest person. But I think that's something to always think around. That's how you continue to grow. And he said this one, and I hope it's true of me. You don't get old and black by accident. You don't get old in anything by accident. But I think that's particularly true. This is one that he would tell us all the time. Stand up to be seen, speak up to be heard, and sit down before you break something. It takes a good team, not a village, to raise a child. Remember, the village is full of idiots. And that's what we're building here, a really good team. Think critically so you can be creative. You cannot separate quant and qual. And you do need to make the numbers make sense. And in understanding those things, it will allow you the freedom to be creative. Show me your checkbook and I'll show you your priorities. Absolutely true. We say we want diversity. And I would say here, it's not just a checkbook. I would say, show me your resources and how you're using them. That will tell me what your priorities are. I love this one. If you see a turtle on a fence, you can bet he didn't get there alone. There are some really crazy, quirky things happening at this institute that make no sense to me. But obviously they happen somehow. So I need to figure out, and we as a community need to figure out how we can get that turtle off a fence. To get your worth, you must know your worth. And I think so many of us, type A people, step into the Institute and become overwhelmed by what we see in its history. And it's easy to diminish ourselves and to shrink. Well, if we know our worth and continue to know our worth, that won't happen. And don't let your past be your future. Obviously, what we're trying to avoid right now. So that really is the part of the presentation that I wanted to share with you. I wanted to leave some time open for some conversation and some questioning. So this is my email, just BGN. The phone number, I don't even think I've set my voicemail up yet. In all honesty, I am still in Baltimore, Maryland. I have not made the trek to Massachusetts yet, waiting for this crazy little thing called COVID to go away. But I did get my first Pfizer shot last week, and in 2 weeks comes the next one. So hopefully I'll be there. But please do send me emails, because I promise I will be responsive. And the website, which you can get to here, or you can get to from our MechE site, we'd love to have you. So with that, I'm gonna get rid of this and just kind of open it up, and yeah.
Bryan, thank you. So, we'll take questions, but I want to point out that this has been so important that you put words to some of the things that we have to look at and do better. And I also want to point out that here's Vishnu Jayaprakash, who is joining us today, who is a driving force in the DI task force, and who has actually, I think, been there from the beginning, bringing Bryan in, and I think raising our awareness across the department by a considerable level. I don't know how to quantify this, but Vishnu is a great person to be here as well. Vishnu and I will take questions together, and please put questions in the questions and answers, put them in a chat. We'll look at them and we will try to get you online and speak if you prefer that. But if you don't like it, just put behind your question that you want us to ask it, and then we can ask it on your behalf. And there's a first question from Hannah. Hannah, would you like to ask this question yourself? I'm going to try to find you in the people, and I'm going to give you the mic.
Hello. Yeah. So my question was sort of, what does your day-to-day look like at MIT since you've joined? You talked a lot about sort of big aspirations, but what have been the actions that you've been doing lately?
Wow, that's a really good question. Thanks, Hannah. So my day-to-day is a combination of flying at 50,000 feet on some things, and then going past the weeds and right straight to the roots. So right now, we're in the process. I'm working with the DEI task force to finish up the strategic plan. So right now, what I'm really doing is going through the plan to make sure it makes sense, make sure that we are connecting with our thought partners around campus, making sure that general counsel looks at it so that it passes legal muster, talking to the folks in Title IX and Title VII, making sure it makes sense there, and HR, talking to groups, faculty groups, student groups, making my way around the Institute to find out. It is substantially more difficult to figure out sometimes who you need to see when all you have is Zoom versus walking down the hallway. So kind of figuring those things out, setting up short-term goals, bringing on a consultant that's going to help us with our implementation phase, and then answering all of those emails and administrative things that everybody else does. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Thank you, Hannah.
We have a question here from Julie. Julie, do you want to ask the question yourself? I'm going to try to find you as well.
Hi, Bryan. Can you hear me?
Hey, Julie, how you doing?
Good. Yeah, this is a really great presentation and talk. I was just wondering, you mentioned, focusing on trying to admit students based on their future potential rather than their past accomplishments. How are you planning on trying to accomplish this? Since I'm sure that it is a lot harder to measure.
Well, I think that's, again, a great question. So let's separate the populations out, undergraduates and graduates. Undergraduates actually, the admissions office led by Stu Schmill, one of my mentors, and I might have mentioned that we were both in high school at the same time, at the same place. But nevertheless, they're already doing that. And by doing that is looking at things. Our students are working to potential. Did they take the toughest courses that were offered? So a student at a school with 23 APs that took one, and a student at a school with no APs that took a calculus course at the community college. What are the letters of recommendation saying? Are they talking about how the student asks for help, how the student self-advocates? So not having a checklist, but making sure that as you're reading the materials, you have these things in mind. And I think on a graduate level, I am positive the questions that we're looking for is not did you get an A in calculus or in lab, but how do you think? Do you think strategically? Do you get the big picture? How do you bring these things together you know, these seemingly, do you have intelligent, what is it? The word escapes me right now. Are you able to hold contradictory ideas in your head? Are you able to see more of the future than the past? And so, and then I think on both cases, these are the kinds of things that need to be in place. I know, I don't know as much about, admittedly so, about the graduate process. I know that it's happening, but to also make sure that as you're asking those questions, they are sensitive to these communities that we are talking about. So I think that is one area where I want to make sure that we're procedural, because you need to go through a process, but make sure that that process allows us to answer that question always. This is the future potential I see of that student. Because if we're only looking at the past performance, our favorite word in undergrad admissions when I was there was a conjunction. And, well, look, perfect SATs, perfect ACTs are #1 in class. And the response was, and? Who are they? What have they done? How are they going to make the Institute better? How do they make me think? So those are some of the things. So making sure you're intertwining these soft things and these soft skills and the more regimented ones. Intellectual, gosh, what is that word? Cognates. So making sure you can hold those things in your mind. Hopefully I answered your question as well.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I think Dawn has a question, and Dawn, I can see here. I'll allow Dawn to talk, and then Dawn can ask a question herself.
Hi, Bryan. Thank you very much for a really exciting talk and really thought-provoking. I was wondering if you had kept up with any of the numbers that you showed for Cornell and MIT. Were those changes able to be something that was systemic after you left, or were those really due to your focused efforts while you were there and they hadn't been institutionalized deeply enough to continue to perform at those high levels after you finished those jobs?
Great question again. So let's start with Cornell. Cornell is an enigma wrapped in a riddle. It's the only university that has both a public component and a private component, and 7 individually at different colleges. So the answer is it's a mixed bag at Cornell. The vice provost for admissions was a guy by the name of Jason Locke, who was a good mentor of mine, who took a lot of the things we did and spread it out so that their policies became enriched so that they could begin the climb, and they're making that climb now. So I would say a lot, when I first got there, a lot of my initial focus was transformative. And then here, I think Stu has done a good job of, I mean, you can look at the numbers now. They're not perfect, but they're moving in that direction. And I think it's a very, very good diverse pool.
Great, thank you.
I also want to point out Dawn is another amazing member of the DEI task force. So thank you, Dawn, for the question as well.
Thanks for the tough question, Dawn.
We have another question from someone who's anonymous, so I'll just ask it. Can you give us, Bryan, some examples of CBOs in Boston that you were reaching out to?
Yes, the Calculus Project. Calculus Project is out of Brookline. They work with students of color that have high aptitude who have not taken calculus. So the #1 course that keeps students from being competitive at highly selective schools is calculus. They work with them as late as the latter part of the summer of the sophomore year, even beginning of the junior year, to get them through AB and BC Calc with amazing success, scores of 4 and 5 on a test, making students who before would not have been, who've not been competitive, and also work on issues around imposter syndrome. The Clubhouse, which actually, there was a book written by a graduate, Robin Chapman. Her PhD was course 2 and course 4, I believe. And it really is a place, and it's grown to all over the country, that works with students of color, providing them STEM opportunities, starting with coding and other ways. So those are just 2 examples of local ones we're working with.
Brian, thank you. I have a question from Rima Das. And Rima, do you want to ask a question yourself?
Sure, yeah. Thank you for the presentation. I'm curious, in what you've seen so far, what have you kind of noticed as the biggest areas of improvement for the department in terms of DEI? I'm thinking almost like a equity audit type of thing of the department. What are your initial thoughts?
Okay, so I have to use this disclaimer. I am speaking solely for myself on this one. And I know it's easy to confuse me, the DI task force and other people. So these are just mine. There's a respect issue here. Groups feel not respected or even disrespected. And so that means that the trust level is already low. I think the culture is also fractured. And I think one of the things, and I think this is common everywhere, is a sense of helplessness in that this is a place of really good people who want to do the right thing, but don't necessarily know how. And that kind of stagnation can be a bit debilitating. So those would be some of the things that I think I've seen immediately.
Thank you.
We have another anonymous question here. Moving forward, what aspects of the MIT MechE, I assume, experience require the most or most immediate action in your mind, Brian?
That's a good question. So that is one that I am struggling with right now. Kind of like one of my favorite TV shows, MASH, where they come in and everybody gets triaged and you got to figure it out. I don't know. Right now, my biggest goal is to separate the things that most need to happen from the things that are making the most noise. So sometimes things make a lot of noise, but aren't the most pressing. I think that that's a very fair question. At the 3-month mark, I don't know yet, but I can tell you by the 6-month mark, I will be able to tell you what my priorities are. And based on those, you'll get a sense of what needs to be immediately dealt with in the short run, and then intermediate and long run. So I'd say stay tuned. So I get to say it. I don't know.
Brian, I think Kelly has said something very, very true here. Thank you for that honesty, right? And you showed this along every part of the talks. I wanted to mention that comment here. And then there's a question that Anthony put in the chat. And Anthony asked, he has a lot of environments, so he can't unmute. I think a small toddler at his house. I'd love to learn more about sustainable policy and established best practices. How is best practice determined? And to be more provocative, can we really know what is best practice if the current best outcome is not so great? So this question of how do we define what is good for us and how do we evaluate it afterwards, right?
I think those, again, those are the kinds of questions that I want to look at, not we can or we can't. So the DEI task force, which has spent well over 1,000 person hours so far, is beginning that very process right now. And that strategic plan that's going to come out will be ideas around what we need to do and the direction that we take. Honestly, once they deliver it, that's when I kind of pick up the ball wholeheartedly and figure out how to implement them and see if they fit in our short-term or long-term goals. Best practices, I think like everything else, we're not the only ones in the universe doing it. There are a lot of places that look very much like us, have similar experiences that we can draw from. There is a lot of literature out there. There's a lot of stuff that we can all really kind of pull in to use as our references. So I don't think we'll have a problem finding out what best practices is or what the options are. I think it's just making it fit for us. And then there's that other piece, institutional research, a great group of campus statisticians who are there to help us look at the numbers critically so that we can think creatively. And just keep your eye out for the strategic plan coming to a MechE department like yours.
Bryan, thank you.
Thanks, Bryan. So we have another question from Yaimani. So we'll try to.
And I'll just say this one thing. I am willing to stay a little later once everything is over. If you guys still have another few questions, I can stay as late as probably 5:20 or so. Thank you. Vishnu, you were saying?
Yeah, I've unmuted Yaimani, so please go ahead.
Hi, it's actually Jadera. I'm using my sister's computer. So hi, everyone. Bryan, thanks so much. Amazing talk. I wanted to know, what do you feel is the biggest misconception of your role that people have?
That's a great question. That I'm the savior and I'm here to save everyone and I have all the answers. My grandfather said of Jesus in his day, many people threw rocks at him and said, reason he walks on waters because he can't swim. The truth of the matter is I can't fix us and we have to want to be fixed and we have to determine what fixing means or that even I have all of the answers. I don't. Hopefully I know where to get most of them, but I think it's the idea that as the, I don't even want to say guru, but as the point person for diversity, that I have all the answers, and I don't.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bryan, I think there's lots more questions and I think we want to take them. It's 5:01 now. So obviously if you can't stick around, feel free to go into your Friday evening, but we'll continue taking a couple of questions because Bryan has graciously agreed to stay on. And I think the next one that has been getting a vote up here a couple of times is from Professor Colin Booyer. So I'm just going to try to find Colin in here to allow him to talk and then he can ask the question himself.
Hey, Bryan, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Colin, how you doing?
Great. So the question is just for a place like MIT, do you feel like change is best instituted top down, so like from strong leadership, or bottom up, kind of from the community?
So that's a great question. Thanks for all the DEI task force people asking me the tough questions. I thought you guys would lob me softballs. So when I really think about this place, it is, from an organizational behavior point of view, it is an outlier and an enigma. So here is the difficulty with either one. So let's say our president, chancellor, top three get together and say, we will do this. This is what we want. And we want these outcomes, and they push it down. The people in the middle who really run this place go, that's nice. I don't know how to do this. I don't know what it means. It gets ground down to a halt. If it comes from the bottom up solely, then we're dealing with populist ideas, things that sound great, but may not be achievable, may not be realistic, may not even be in our best interest, but it feels good and it sounds good. So I think the key is that it has to come from more than one. It has to come from all the way around. It has to come from various voices at various places. It has to come from leaders here. And those leaders, whether in a leadership position or leaders because of who they are are going to have to help us make those decisions. So I don't think there is any one way. But what I will say to that is, for any of this to be successful, there has to be buy-in from leadership. There just has to be buy-in. And there has to be a willingness of rank and file to abide by that leadership. So I don't know if I really answered, but I hope I did.
No, that was great. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Brian. I want to go back to one of the earlier questions from David. Let me try to find you. And yeah, here you go. You should be able to unmute and ask.
Hey there, Brian.
Hey,
Thank you
David.
so much. This was really great. I've wondered for a long time about sort of what goes on behind the curtain of admissions and trying to diversify this kind of world, because it's such an odd place. So thank you so much. That's super helpful. I'm kind of wondering for myself, I've probably never felt more like one of those stagnant, don't know what to do, but I am certainly in a position of privilege throughout my life as a white male. And I've been wondering, especially since last summer, what on earth can I actually do? And I know that's a really hard question to answer, but I might really appreciate your unique perspective on that complicated question. And I know you mentioned earlier, part of the problem is those sort of well-intended folks who still don't know what to do and might actually hurt more than they help in some of their actions. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is thank you for the thoughtfulness, because admitting what you just did allows you to see yourself in a different light. There's a couple of things. The first is that over the next couple of weeks, I am going to be sending out from various places self-assessments that people can do in the comfort of their own home and their own surrounding, that will really help you to figure out where you fall on the spectrum: beginner, intermediate, more intermediate, because I don't know that there are any experts. So that's the first piece. The second piece is don't beat yourself up about it, because that leads to fragility, and we just don't need that. And the third thing is commit to being an ally, because those that are looking, to those that you ally, we are always suspicious. And we expect that when the going gets tough, you're going to run. And at some point, you're going to screw it up and make a mistake. And the truth of the matter is, I think from allies, I don't really care if they fall down. I want to see how quickly they get up and come back to the table. So I say it's the little things. You're surrounded by folks who say or do the wrong thing, and you just say, hey, I'm not comfortable with that, or you don't need to do that. I'll give you a quick story of me trying to do that. I love cigars. Everybody that knows me, I was in a lounge the other day, and there was a gentleman, and one of the women that worked there, he just kept calling her honey, and hey, honey, can I get this? Can I get that? And I just reached over and I said, you know, that might be, you know, a little denigrating to her. Why don't you try that? That's just not how you should be addressing her. And he said, well, what do you think? I said, how about calling her by a name? And then he looks over and he says, excuse me, what's your first name? And she says, you know, my first name is Honey. So there's a great example of me trying to do the right thing, screwing it up, but realizing, all right, well, I still got to get back on the horse. And so just do what you can when you can. Look for the things that I'm going to send out, and then just stay in the fight.
Thank you so much.
Brian, thank you. There's an anonymous question here. How easy or difficult has it been to implement change at MIT, and specifically at MIT Mechanical Engineering? Are faculty and staff usually supportive and have the necessary time? And that might be a question that you're still sort of exploring, but if you want to answer that,
sure.
You
folks do know I've only been here since January 1st. I think that there is one of the things that I enjoy about MIT is that there is a healthy sense of skepticism, and that skepticism is often born on the sleeve of the skeptical. In other words, they are more likely to tell you why they don't believe it. And so that gives me the ability to understand the true motivation and what needs to be done. So, to that professor who says, who I once said, we need to get away from standardized tests. And his response was, yeah, but we give a lot of tests here. I need to knowing that helps me to understand how I need to faction what's going to be done. I haven't really had, I'm probably still in my honeymoon phase. I haven't had the tough conversations yet. But from what I'm seeing, the reason I took the job is because I know this place and I believe that it is willing to change. Are those changes going to be easy? Probably not. Can I serve every member of this community at all times? Yes, but not by giving them exactly what they want. So I say again, stay tuned. I promise quarterly, I will give updates, substantive stuff, so that it doesn't feel like I'm going away to Hermitville, doing something and just rolling it out. I do believe that it's important for the community to be involved.
Awesome. We have another question from Rabab. She's been super active in the members at large group, so thank you for that as well, Rabab. And I'm going to allow you to talk now.
The wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I was interested in kind of the second stage of that pipeline. So we've talked a lot about kind of bringing more undergrads in, but then keeping them within either academia or at least in the professional field. So the transition from undergrad to graduate, potentially faculty, or at least being involved in organizations like IEEE and ASME through publications or positions in those societies. And I guess two-pronged. One, what do you see the role of kind of advisor and student relationships and mentorship in potentially achieving more equity and inclusion in those areas? And then do you see any other things that we can do to kind of achieve that a little bit better?
Wow, that's a lot. Okay, let me see if I can unpack that. Great questions. So I think the first part is mentorship and guidance and leadership are the key. Think about it like this. When we recruit undergrads, we know where to get them. You just go find a high school, go find high schoolers. There you go, ready audience. Folks coming to graduate school could come from institutions, could come from other places, could come from industry. They come to us. It is harder for us to just kind of go out. So getting a known quantity, knowing a known quantity, one of the pipelines should be our undergrads. This should be a possibility. Now, the difference between the undergraduate world and the graduate world is the undergraduate world has a cap. And we have no say-so in what we get. They do a fine job, but we do have control over what we get for graduate students. And one of the things for graduate students is there is no one pipeline. There needs to be several different streams because not all pipelines are going to pay off at all times. So I would say faculty and advising and all of those pieces, professional development, are going to be important. And I think one of our measurements should be what percentage of our own are coming here. Now, with that said, we are #1 in the world and we do draw from the world. So being here should not be the golden ticket, but we should be able to explain why the number is where it is. Thanks, that's a good question.
Thank you so much.
And thank you. And Rabab, thank you for the question. Bryan, one question that comes out here is very direct. Is there follow-up with alumni? Do we know how alumni think about it or how they can shape our community as well, given that they have experienced it for quite a while, depending as an undergraduate or as graduate or as a staff member or as a faculty, right? How do they think about it when they leave MIT?
Yeah, I think I think alumni are very important because they're your ambassadors to the world. And I think that they can take the message forward. I mean, just think about it, the undergraduate level, we do interviews, and those are primarily with alums. But you also have to be careful because alums become anachronistic. They remember MIT always as they saw it, not as it currently is or may need to be. One of the areas I think we really need to tap into them is in the world of development. These changes that we want to make are not going to come cheap. And quite frankly, Evelyn doesn't have the discretionary budget or can get the budget to do the kinds of things that we need to do. So those alums can help with the heavy lifting of bringing to the table people that they know in industry to help us. They can be conduits to help us say, hey, I just identified this great young man in my office, I think, or a young lady, I think they'd be perfect in your master's program, or here's some money, or here, let me help you raise money. So I think there's a place at the table for them. But I think with alums, it's important to be really clear with what you're asking for from them.
Thank you, Bryan. And it's another story of you show your priorities by what you are willing to pay for, right, as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So the last question that we have here is from someone anonymous. Great talk, Bryan. I'm wondering what advice you have for measuring culture change. How can we assess the success of our programs without getting caught up in chasing lowercase d diversity metrics?
Yeah, that's the sword of Damocles that hangs over my head all of the time. Well, I think the first thing that you do is make sure as you're going forward, the policies that you are proposing take into account inclusion. And I mean, even think about the way phraseology is important. After Brown versus the Board of Education, we never talked about integration. We talked about desegregation. And those are two different things. What we're talking about here is inclusion. And so what I want to be really clear about in inclusion is we're not saying we're going to necessarily directly meet the needs of everybody in the community. What we are saying is that we're going to create a community that is safe and comfortable for those folks. And community can change from time to time. But I think there's a bunch of things we can do. We can do climate surveys. Speaking of which, whenever surveys come out, staff, faculty, students, undergrads, graduates, if you don't respond to them, then we don't know. And the folks of color in our department have a nasty habit of not filling out these surveys. So surveys are like voting, vote. We can do climate surveys. We can have focus groups. There's a lot of ways to get to it. So I am more worried about analysis paralysis, where we're more worried about we can't do this, we can't do that. We stick our toe in it, we give it a try. If it works, great. If it doesn't, we pivot and move on. And as long as we're coming from a good place, and as long as we are doing it methodically in a good and ethical way, then I believe that we'll be okay.
Bryan, thank you. I think we reached the last question that I can see here, and it's going to be close to the 5:20 limits that you set for us. So perfect timing on everything. Thank you all for your questions. This is all virtual. Unfortunately, we're now not in the same room, so that we could all sort of hang out around the table, discuss with Bryan, maybe take him for dinner and a cigar and a bottle of wine or beer, whatever you prefer. But hopefully that can be done as soon as everything is back to normal. And it's awesome to have you on board. It's awesome to have you actually put a spotlight on a couple of things that we're doing right, that we're doing wrong, things that could change, and how this all affects our community at MIT and then mechanical engineering in particular. So thank you, Bryan, for talking with us today. I want to give a chance to Vishnu to say something, if you want to say something, and then.
Oh yeah, a fantastic talk again, Bryan. It's really an honor to work with you in the task force as well. And thank you to everyone who attended. I know Hannah brought up earlier that we should get more attendance at events like these, but it's heartening to see 50 people show up to a talk on Friday evening and really listen and ask fantastic questions. So thank you all so much for caring and making MIT a better place.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great weekend, and I hope your NCAA bracket is not as busted as mine was. So good luck.